is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now he wrote that in order to wed to the American soul the idea of the natural law, that our rights come from our humanity. Whether you believe that we are created by an all-knowing, all-loving, all-powerful God who has counted the hairs on our head, or whether you believe that we are the highest process of natural selection, you can accept the view that from somewhere from within us comes our rights, not from outside of us. The government doesn't confer rights. We permit the government to exercise authority subject to the power we give the government and subject to our individual consent. That is at least the theory of the American Revolution. It is the value judgment made by those who risk their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honors when they challenge the mightiest king and the mightiest army and the mightiest navy for freedom. Why did they engage in that challenge? Well, 10 years before the Revolution, the king and the parliament needed cash. And one of the ingenious ways that they extracted cash from the colonists was an abominable, horrific piece of legislation called the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act required that every piece of paper in the possession of the colonists, not in England, just in the colonies, every piece of paper, every book, every financial document, every legal document, every poster to be nailed to a tree, every letter, every postcard, every pamphlet have a stamp on it bearing the king's image. Effectively, you had to go to a British government post office in the United States and buy these stamps. Question: how did the king and the parliament 3,000 miles away know if Americans, colonists in America, had stamps on every piece of paper in their possession? Answer: another abominable piece of legislation called the Writs of Assistance Act. This law, enacted by the Parliament, permitted British soldiers to write their own search warrants. So it was not uncommon for you to hear a knock at your door, at which a British soldier and 5 soldiers working for him handed you a piece of paper on which the soldier had authorized himself and his men to enter your home, ostensibly to look for the stamps. Of course, while there, they might help themselves to alcohol, if you couldn't prove you had paid a tax on it. They might help themselves to a fine piece of furniture, if you couldn't prove how you paid for it. They might even help themselves to the house itself, which is why, of course, we have in our Constitution and our Bill of Rights the Third Amendment, which prohibits quartering of troops against the wishes and intent of the owner. This, of course, was the last straw. Some very bright students at a place called the College of New Jersey, now known as Princeton, did some calculations, and they produced the following results. It cost the king and the parliament more money to enforce the Stamp Act than Parliament was receiving in revenue collected by the Stamp Act. So question: why would the king and the Parliament enact a revenue-gathering, generating piece of legislation if it would cost them more than they would bring in? Perhaps it was to remind the colonists that the king on his own could send his troops across your threshold and into your home without probable cause, without the authorization of a judge, ostensibly to look for a stamp. Now, all of this, of course, was the last straw. We fought a revolution. We won the revolution. We wrote a constitution. In 1787 in Philadelphia, when the Constitution is debated, the first argument is, where do our rights come from? There was a big government crowd in Philadelphia. It was led by Alexander Hamilton and John Adams, and they argued the following: we need the government to protect our rights. Without the government, our rights are meaningless. And the government, therefore, knows when to restrict and when to expand our rights. And without the government protecting them, there can be no rights. Therefore, our rights come from the government. The Jeffersonian argument, he wasn't there, he was in Paris. So this argument was basically articulated by Madison and his followers, was, wait a minute, we all signed the Declaration of Independence. It says that our rights are inalienable, that they come from our Creator. We just fought a war against a king and a parliament that claimed that our rights came from them. How can we possibly start a new government here, establish a new country, on the same premise from which we had just risked our lives, fortunes, and sacred honors to revolt and rebel, and in which we were successful. And as a result of that, we have, of course, the Constitution with its separation of powers, and we have the Bill of Rights, which enumerates those rights that the government, theoretically, cannot impair. But you all know, I guarantee it, everyone here knows the first few words and some of the middle words of the First Amendment, for example. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Now, Jefferson was once asked which is the most important of those words, and I'll repeat them for you. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Jefferson argued, and I agree with him, and I expect you will. The most important word is the freedom of speech, because it expresses the recognition of the founders that freedom of speech pre-existed them, pre-existed the government, pre-existed the country, because it came and comes from our humanity. And so all of those rights in the Bill of Rights, the right to think as you wish, the right to say what you think, the right to publish what you say, the right to worship or not to worship, the right to develop your own personality as you see fit. I've often told O'Reilly he should be grateful for that right, for that freedom. The right to keep and bear arms, which doesn't mean the right to shoot at a deer. It means the right to shoot at the government if it's taken over by tyrants. And of course, that quintessentially American right articulated in the Fourth Amendment, the right to be left alone. Today we call it the right to privacy. The king and his soldiers, the president and his agents cannot cross your threshold of your home without a warrant issued by a neutral judge based on probable cause, a fancy phrase meaning a demonstration under oath to the judge that it is more likely than not that there is evidence of a crime in the home. Fast forward 10 years. We finish the 2 terms of George Washington. The president is John Adams. The vice president is Thomas Jefferson. That's an odd combination. Do you remember how people got elected to president and vice president in those days? Everybody ran for president. Whoever finished first became president. Whoever finished second became vice president. Can you think of the bizarre combinations that would have produced in modern times? So Jefferson and Adams barely spoke to each other. Jefferson was the champion of individual liberty, of states' rights. He was an imperfect person. He had slaves. He defended slavery. Obviously an abomination in his thinking and his behavior. But he wasn't in favor of the big government that Adams was. Jefferson was also very close to his adopted country, during which he had been the ambassador of the United States in the Articles of Confederation years, France. And somehow during the Adams administration, there spreads through the country this bizarre, lurid, and unfounded fear of the French. Oh, how the times have changed. So Congress decides we're worried that French people are going to come there and become citizens and vote for somebody like Jefferson of all godforsaken people